People who spend a lot of time in seclusion, what's the creepiest or most mysterious thing you've seen, found, or experienced? Story 1. The story happened in August 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I'm a USAF Security Forces airman, serving as a military policeman. While my girlfriend was occupied at work, a sweltering day gradually gave way to thunderstorms. At that moment, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to explore some back roads, escaping the scorching heat of town. In southern Oregon, logging roads crisscross, some bustling with activity while many lay forgotten, reclaimed by nature. Nick and I often spent our days off exploring familiar routes, uncovering new ones, journeying for hours into the mountains, and always finding our way back to paved roads. But on this day, with storm clouds looming, we drove deeper into the mountains on an unfamiliar road. Having driven for almost an hour, the woods remained devoid of any signs of sounds of human presence. We went on a turn within the dense fir woods and suddenly emerged in a meadow enclosed by dense aspen groves. The meadow lay eerily silent, strikingly flat. Both of us immediately sensed the unsettling stillness. No chirping birds, scarce insect noise, no playful squirrels, and notably, no other souls around. Positioned at the far end of the meadow, just at the edge of the trees, sat a weird sight: a picnic table. This table was very strange. It was painted a vibrant orange hue, exceeding the dimensions of a typical park picnic table. Intrigued, Nick drove through the meadow, aiming to inspect this thing up close. I remember feeling apprehensive as we neared the scene. The situation felt extraordinarily bizarre. The eerie quiet within the aspen groves heightened my unease. Moreover, the thick growth of aspens made it nearly impossible to see deep into the trees. As we parked near the table, I exited the passenger seat, standing at a modest height of about 5'5". Nonetheless, the table appeared absurdly oversized, rendering it practically unusable. Its seats were positioned nearly at chest level, requiring me to climb up just to take a seat. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the aspens. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I felt an initial sense of dread, convinced that someone was inside the tent, aware of our presence since we had a clear view of it. No campgrounds were nearby, no signs of people, and no main roads for miles. It seemed strange that someone would camp in such a remote area. However, upon observing the tent, no movement or sound was coming from it. Nick suggested I call out, and although hesitant, I did so, shouting, "Hey, anyone there?" into the stillness of the surroundings. No response came. Filled with unease, Nick and I contemplated leaving the place. However, we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body inside the tent? What if there had been foul play, someone kidnapped, or worse? It might have seemed foolish, but the thought haunted our minds. After some debate, we agreed on a plan. Nick would turn the truck around, positioned for a quick escape if needed. With my heart racing, I started walking through the trees toward the tent, my senses on full alert. Every nerve on edge, I reached the campsite and was immediately struck by several odd things. Backpacks strewn around, no sign of a fire or gathered wood, and then the tent was crammed with backpacks and women's clothing. Dread washed over me, making me rush back and tell Nick what I had seen. As I hurried away, Nick's voice erupted in panicked yelling.
"Let's go! Let's get out of here!"
Nick's urgent yell jolted me, making me run towards the truck without understanding the cause of his alarm, until something came out of nowhere. A battered old Ford Taurus was blocking our exit from the meadow. I jumped into the passenger seat as Nick slammed the gas pedal. Inside the car were two men. A third slumped against the back window. As we sped across the meadow, the driver tried to block us, yet Nick maneuvered around them, accelerating in the direction we'd come. Glancing back, I saw their attempt to turn on the narrow road. Nick drove with sheer determination, and though fear gripped me, I worried they might catch up. Miraculously, we hit the highway without sight of the car again. To this day, I remain uncertain of the gender of the person in the back. I called the state police and they assured me they'd dispatch a trooper to investigate. Yet the following day I received a call from the trooper reporting that the campsite, backpacks, and women's clothing had vanished, leaving only traces of human presence behind. The picnic table remained near the dense aspen grove. I made a firm decision not to return to that area. I have no intention of doing so. What was that tent and table for? We may never find out. But one thing's for sure. There's definitely a dark secret buried deep in those woods. Story 2. This occurred to a close friend and me, both 23 years old, just last month. We planned a 2-night backpacking and camping expedition in New York's Adirondack Mountains. Comfortable and familiar with nature, we often went camping, hunting, fishing, and other similar activities outdoors. We hiked about 5 miles into a small lake and set up camp on a small beach. This wasn't a heavily trafficked area, and we didn't expect to run into anyone. On our first night there, as we were sitting around the fire, we saw a flashlight moving on the other side of the lake around 10:30. This was fairly unusual. However, we didn't think too much of it. However, as time passed, the flashlight continued its movements around the lake, gradually nearing our campsite. We kept discussing about who might be wandering in the woods in the dead of night, not welcoming the idea of an unexpected visitor. Once it was clear that the person, or people, was heading for our campsite, we moved off into the nearby woods to see who wandered up. I took a small axe with me and my friend had a weapon. We weren't expecting trouble, and we certainly didn't want to make any, but we figured we might as well cover our bases. Now the moment of truth arrived. The flashlight approached our firelight, revealing a lone man. He had a beard and appeared to be in his mid-40s, but the alarming part was the weapon he carried. He circled the campsite a few times and eventually went inside our tent. After rummaging around for a minute or so, he yelled, "I know you're out there. Why don't you come and say hello?" My friend and I stayed utterly still beneath a hemlock tree, roughly 50 yards away. That's when the man fired his weapon into the woods, not too far from our location. He swung his flashlight around multiple times. It felt like hours passed before he seized my friend's backpack and some clothes we had drying near the fire, tossing them in to burn. My friend, who aimed the weapon at the man, inquired if he should shoot. I told him not to, unless the man detected us and aimed our way. Fortunately, after some time, the man moved away from his original spot. We bided our time until his flashlight was on the opposite side of the lake, swiftly gathered everything we could fit in my pack and hurried away. But then it was around 2 or 3 a.m. We ran along the trail with our flashlights, reaching my car just as the sun began to rise. We rushed to the police department, reported the incident, and spoke with some forest rangers. Since then, I haven't received any updates from the police. While not mysterious, it certainly freaked the hell out of us. Story 3. Our friends and I used to head up into the mountains during winter, towing someone in a tube behind my truck across the snow. In my old long bed Ford, we'd lower the tailgate and a few guys would sit in the back with a super bright spotlight. While driving, I'd enjoy making wide turns in the dark, depriving the person on the tube of the luxury of headlights or taillights to illuminate their path. The person in the truck bed handling the spotlight would playfully shine it off to the side, plunging the tube rider into pitch darkness. On one winter night, a snowstorm was approaching, and it was exceptionally dark as we went to our usual spot. With a friend in the tube, I maneuvered the truck, deliberately keeping him in the dark by swinging wide turns, making it hard for him to see anything. The person with the spotlight directed it clear to the side of the truck. As I checked my mirror, I made eye contact with the guy dressed in jeans, a red plaid shirt, and a blaze orange ball cap. As we locked eyes, I lost control of my body for probably only 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I stopped the truck, turned it around, and asked the guys if they saw him. They all said no, so I flipped the truck around, turned on the high beams, and they shined the spotlight all over. I got out and looked for footprints in the fresh snow, but saw nothing. That night, we returned home and I shared the weird experience with my dad, but he didn't think much of it. About a week later, the police made a public announcement in the news, reporting the discovery of a body in the vicinity of where we had been that night. My dad encouraged me to contact the police and inform them about seeing the person in that area. I called and the police assured me they would send an investigator over. The investigator arrived at the house and I told him the exact experience, stating it occurred precisely 7 days earlier. When I mentioned this, the investigator asked, "Are you sure about the date?" I was confident in my memory, then showed me a picture of what they discovered, dressed in the same red plaid shirt and blaze orange ball cap. He explained that it had rested in the mound for at least a month, implying I must have seen something else. It turned out to be a man grappling with mental challenges who had taken his life in the mountain, a month before I saw him. I can only imagine how terrifying it must be to see a ghost, especially during a cold winter's night. Did this story make your hair stand on end? Well, I hope not, because story 7 is even more creepy. You won't believe what they saw out in the sea. Story 4. During college, I spent 1 month taking care of a large hunting estate in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. The nearest town lay 22 miles away. In the dead of night, I woke up to loud, insistent knocking at the front door, accompanied by dogs' frantic barking. No way was I going to answer it. I simply armed myself and kept quiet upstairs. The following morning, a car was parked in the driveway. Months later, the person who owned that car was discovered deceased. I remained completely clueless about what happened. Here's the long version. It was June of 1987. I remember the year distinctly as it followed the baseball season after the Bill Buckner disaster. The property belonged to my girlfriend's parents and was situated in S.E., Idaho. I'd rather not disclose the specific town, as they might still own it, and I'd rather not make the situation any more strange than it already is. It was a big property. My girlfriend's dad proposed paying me $1,200 to stay there. The deal included free meals, satellite TV, and complimentary drinks. I spent the time reading and exploring, playing with the dogs, riding the horse, and target shooting. It was a completely uneventful experience until that night. After the knocking stopped and the dog stopped barking, I eventually went back to sleep. I didn't freak out all that much because 2 German shepherds were inside with me, and I had a weapon. I kept it on the nightstand. I had been drinking a little, but not drunk by any means. There were several neighbors that were a few miles away. I was kind of thinking someone just simply drove up the wrong driveway. The next morning at the crack of dawn, I opened the front door to allow the dogs out and spotted a white Chevy Nova parked in the driveway near the small caretaker's cabin, about 100 yards from the main house. I immediately called my girlfriend's dad, asking if he was familiar with anyone owning that specific make and model of car. I shared the events of the previous night with him. He didn't recognize the car or its owner, so he called the police. The police arrived, asked a few questions, and thoroughly inspected the property for approximately an hour. The police stowed away the locked car, although I couldn't tell if it was broken down. Strangely, only a single set of tire tracks led to the house. A few days later, my girlfriend's dad called me, telling me that the car's owner had gone missing, and advised me to alert the police if anything strange happened again. I had no clue about the individual's identity, the duration of their absence, when they were reported missing, or by whom. All I knew was that the guy was simply missing. My girlfriend's dad didn't have much information beyond that. After a month, I returned home. Shortly after, my girlfriend and I broke up. Months later, I met her in town and asked her about the fate of the man related to the car incident. All she knew was that he was discovered deceased by self-inflicted harm, about 30 miles away. It occurred several months after the incident at the house, and he was found a couple of days after what he did to himself. I asked for details, how it happened, where he was found, who discovered him, but she couldn't provide any further information. That was the last time I saw her. Story 5. 3 years ago, I lived with my parents in Meadow, Wyoming, a small and secluded area. It was Halloween and my parents had decorated the house, anticipated about 3 to 4 kids to show up. Considering the house was about a mile from a subdivision and parents typically drove their kids, assuming no one else would be coming around, as a child I brought in the chair with candy. I was in the basement without windows where very little sound could escape. It's almost midnight. All the lights upstairs were shut off because I was going to bed. Then I heard a knock at the side door, which no one ever knocks at. I went upstairs and the floodlight wasn't on, which usually turns on automatically, so I switched on another light that illuminates the basketball hoop area. That's when I saw a person in one of those old man masks with crazy hair, just standing there, gazing at the house. Suddenly, they sprinted to the back where the patio was. I heard loud banging in the back windows. Honestly, it was the loudest kicking I've ever heard. I rushed over and the person was just staring. Then they ran away and I didn't hear anything for about 5 minutes. Suddenly, I started hearing the knob to the main door being forcefully jiggled back and forth. I sprinted upstairs to the bedroom and headed to the crawl space in the attic. I immediately dialed 911. This was the first time I ever dialed 911, so I didn't know what to expect. But the operator didn't seem very shocked or eager to send out a car quickly. I remember repeating my address about 12 times, and the lady kept saying, "Calm down, sir." She wanted me to stay on the line, but I was afraid if the guy got in, he would recognize my voice. I hung up and I could hear the knob being slammed as if he had a hammer or something. I was having a full-on panic attack, wheezing, trying to get air. Then I heard the side door, the original door, being kicked super hard. At that point, I was shaking so badly that the dust from the floorboards was flying up in the air. I heard a window smash and immediately knew he would get in. I held my breath, which made the wheezing worse. I felt sick, listening for footsteps or anything, but there was nothing. The actual amount of time I spent up there was around 16 minutes, but it felt like an hour. An officer arrived and pounded on the door. I dashed downstairs and swung the door open. I explained everything to him and the backup sheriffs who arrived. They all insisted it was probably a friend trying to scare me, but I had no friends in Wyoming. None at all. They inspected the house and took some notes, but nothing else happened. After they left, I followed them to Cody and booked a hotel room. Even now, I can't sleep without all the lights on and a weapon on my dresser. Story 6. This incident occurred during high school. I was at a summer camp where boys and girls were housed separately. Typically, we slept in different cabins, but our counselor suggested camping outside on this pleasant evening. Fueled by the freedom of the outdoors, we, a group of overly testosterone high schoolers, chose to break away from our supervision and make a beeline for the girls' campsite. Upon reaching their site and feeling clueless about what to do, we thought tossing various items into the fire, resulting in subsequent explosions, would serve as a good icebreaker. Regrettably, owing to our ingenious plan, we were swiftly brought back to our camp and separated from the girls. Unafraid, we decided to regroup and give it another shot. As we set off toward their site again, we heard a thunderous bang, almost like that from a high-caliber weapon. The sound was followed by another bang, then an unsettling silence. We all felt paralyzed, unsure of our next move. Was it from the girls' site? We were too afraid to investigate. A flashlight could be seen in the distance, moving around in the area. I remember lying quietly, barely able to sleep, exchanging jokes with fellow campers about who might get hurt first if that bang had indeed come from a weapon. The next morning, we woke up, alive but deeply confused about what had happened. I actually only learned about it after returning home from camp. It turned out a man fired at his ex at a house right near the campsite where he had stayed that night. Aside from the said incident, what struck me the most was an interview with a neighbor who didn't call the police immediately because she assumed the noise was from some foolish kids causing accidents at a campsite. It must have felt so disturbing to realize that you were just a stone's throw away from a crime scene. By the way, if you're really into these terrifying stories from remote areas, then give this video a like and subscribe to my channel today. Join me, and let's take a walk on the dark side. Story 7. I was on a 41-foot sailboat in the heart of the Chesapeake Bay, accompanied by about 7 other men. We sailed on a shakedown or test cruise, intending to spend approximately 12 hours at sea. In the mid-1980s, weather prediction tools weren't as dependable as today. We got caught in a tropical storm, the wind surging close to 50 miles per hour, just a hair short of a weak hurricane. We hastily rigged storm hawsers and sails, thanks to the quick thinking of the most seasoned sailor among us who sensed the impending storm. Otherwise, we would have perished. During the storms, we raced for a tragic end. In fact, we transmitted a Securite radio call. We were in a maelstrom for what felt like 15 minutes, with zero visibility, but then it subsided. We were happy to know we would live. This occurred at around 3 p.m., and despite the cloud cover, the ambient light allowed visibility of about 2 miles in any direction. If you're familiar with the sea, you're aware that such storms, especially in shallower depths near land masses, bring up numerous things from the seafloor. We're all on deck, tending to lines, assessing damage, and the bay surrounding us is tumultuous, with choppy waters and foaming waves. Sailors of old often described such conditions as the sea being confused. I glanced about 15 feet off the starboard side and witnessed something swimming to the surface, breaking it, gazing in a direction and then submerging once more. It resembled a slender man with a humanoid shape, arms structured like a human and a head similar to that of a human, but its skin was scaly, resembling that of a snake. It glanced at us, blinked its weird, heavy-lidded eyes, and then plunged back beneath the surface. Perhaps you should know a few things about me at that moment. No illegal substances, no alcohol, and no injuries. I was filled with elation, grateful for being alive, yet my senses in that situation were heightened, not dulled. At that point, I had roughly 6 years of experience on ships and fishing boats, encountering squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, and more, across various locations worldwide. I wasn't the kind of person to mistake a patch of seaweed for a sea monster. I immediately decided to keep quiet. What could I possibly say? I just spotted a weird creature, trust me. The men aboard were all mechanics, engineers, and professionals. What's the point of risking being seen as strange? At that time, obtaining D-Skipper or OOD qualifications was crucial for each of us, and making such a statement would have been discouraged. And as I stood there in my life vest, drenched, secured to the steel lifeline, relieved to be alive, another sailor, USN Captain J.S., with over 30 years of experience in the surface navy, spoke up.
I just witnessed a brown object emerge in the surface. It appeared to be a lizard-like figure with a scaly face. It blinked at us with these large eyes and then disappeared below.
Yeah, I saw it too, I said. No one else mentioned having seen it. Later that day, we sailed back to the pier and never spoke of it again. Story 8. We were hiking when this mountain lion started tailing us. It was late night, just 5 of us, and we had a couple of flashlights. I gave one to the leader and had one myself at the back. I felt watched, so I quickly flicked the light around us and glanced back, catching those glowing green eyes attached to something sinking off the trail. Our light was weak. I couldn't really get a good look, but about 3/4 of the time I turned, I saw something. It trailed us for like half an hour, until we were just a stone's throw away from the cars. The rest of the team didn't have a clue, and I know mountain lions usually don't mess with big groups, but statistics wasn't my thing at that moment. I kept quiet about it and didn't want to freak anyone out. Be careful when you're out in the wilderness. You never know what kind of apex predators might be lurking around. Thanks for sticking around. If you're looking for more spooky stories, check out What's Your Creepiest Home Alone Story? Story 3 will make you double check your locks every night. See you there.